Hey, buddy.
How's it going, man?
Pretty good.
I struggle with this whenever I make it vertical like this. I'm always like awkwardly kind of in one side.
Yeah.
So what's up, man?
Oh, nothing. Nothing. Just got done doing a little scouting. Had to work, and then I got in the woods for a couple hours after work, and just got home.
Nice.
So, how's the doing?
Uh, I mean, better. About as good as I could hope for, I think. Um,
Yeah.
it's just one of those deals where you're like chipping away at it every day a little bit, and I'm feeling better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Definitely feeling better now than the first 2 weeks. Like first 2 weeks after surgery were brutal. And
Sure.
do you know Josh Elderton at all?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
he had knee surgery, I don't know, a year or two ago, and he was like talking to me about it, and he's like, "Be prepared for some, you know, serious pain." And I kind of was like, "Yeah, whatever." I mean, a little bit. And my mom also had ACL surgery, and I totally underestimated it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest, it was rough, man. But once I got
Oh,
through those first 2 weeks, every day it's just a little bit better. I'm doing like a 90-degree squat at this point, so that's pretty good. Can walk,
yeah.
go for walks and stuff. So chipping away day by
Good.
day. I think what I want to talk about is like going to be more. I just want to talk about details of as many things as possible, and just I want to hear about the details of what you're thinking about this season, past seasons. I want to hear stories, and just I really want to dive into detail because I feel like if we don't, we'll just kind of get caught up in that just kind of same old type of conversation, setting up on
Mm-hmm.
sign or whatever, but more specific and more detail, I feel like is always a fun thing. And any way that you see we can go down that route throughout the conversation, feel free to just head that way. I mean, I guess the more detail is how I learn. So I feel like the more we
Mm-hmm.
can talk about that, the better. So
Okay. Yeah, we can give it a try.
I'm just recording, so we'll just kind of let her rip if you're cool with it. Unless you have any questions or anything.
No, no, I'm ready to go. It sounds good.
I'm pretty laid back. I like having fun, so I just want to have fun and learn from you. So,
All right.
all right. So I guess the first thing, since you said you were out scouting today, what were you out doing
Mm-hmm.
today specifically here on April 18th?
Yeah, so today there's a spot that's not far from my work. It's a little permitted spot. So part of the thing I try to do around home in Michigan, I actually commute quite a bit from home to work to my daughter's school. Like everything is like really far away from each other and in the total opposite directions. So I've tried to, because my time is pretty limited these days, just because of her age and her activities and stuff. I try to find places to hunt kind of in those routes, so that I am able to get out after work or, don't have to drive 3, 4 hours, on a weekend or something like that. Um, it helps me. It helps me be able to get out like during the week or sometimes in the morning, and I'm kind of sacrificing, um, in some circumstances, some good hunting by doing that, but it allows me to get out. So between some different public pieces, some walking ground, and some knock on door permission stuff, I kind of have like a string of different properties that I routinely go to, routinely scout, and check out. So this particular one is a permission piece. This little lady gave me permission to hunt behind her spot, and it's a very small, narrow piece of private ground, and it butts up to a big um, piece of ground that's owned by the city that doesn't allow any hunting. So it's kind of an interesting potential. I've never hunted it.
Mm-hmm.
But last year I got permission and I popped it. I made a big mock scrape out there because it's one of those properties where like, yeah, they could pass through, but there's no real bedding area on there. There's nothing that's a big draw. I mean, it is just a couple acres straight, like rectangle. So I made this really big mock scrape and I put a camera on it and just let it soak the whole season. And man, it, it heated up with buck activity, like right around, actually there were some deer in the early season, some two-year old bucks, decent bucks. And then right around that mid to late October, early November timeframe, that scrape started getting hit pretty good. And, there were some good looking deer in there. So I was like, man, this could be a potential cool spot. And, you can't like, it's not like an area that's nowhere near big enough to put like a little food plot in, and you can't bait. So I've tried to create some sort of like little destination where maybe I just might be able to get a shot at a deer in the area. So it's a little different than what I'm used to hunting, but I've hunted some really small pieces of ground before too. So I'm kind of experimenting with that. I've had the mock scrape stuff in the past, but not really like using it in that way, like I'm going to try to shoot one right here, but that's really my only option. So I'm kind of interested to see, how it pans out. Cause if I would have hunted it last year, I would have had, multiple opportunities at bucks. Nothing big and mature, but there was a solid 3-year-old buck in there, probably 125 inches, so I went in there and I kind of found a little access route where I can get in real quiet. And I found a tree, did a little trimming and whatnot. So, I mean, it's literally you sneak in, you get up in this one tree and your shot is like right there. And, if it doesn't happen there, it doesn't happen at all. So it'll be an interesting little experiment.
Yeah. I think it's cool that it's a small piece and you don't have a lot of options for it. So you're taking what you can get. I think about that a lot for hunting small properties, and it's something that I don't get to really mess around with much. I did a little bit more when I was younger in the area that I grew up in, but it's something that, I feel like there's this bit of me that's always like, you're always going to want more experiences. And like, while I love hunting public land and hunting big areas, there is something fascinating about playing your cards a little bit differently on those smaller properties. So I think that's cool and something that there's just a lot to learn from that for me, just because I don't really hunt those types of areas.
Yeah. Yeah. And I haven't done a lot on this. I mean, it's small. It's only a couple acres. But I know guys out there that do well, working those little small parcels. So it's not entirely foreign to me. But the way I've set this up and the way I'm going to hunt it is pretty unique to my style even. So yeah, it's kind of interesting and something new. And, the more I see like successful guys and their different styles, like, in comparison to someone like me, compared to like someone like Jared Scheffler or the Seek One guys, like we're all so different, and it's kind of neat. And you're like, man, I want to try that, just see what it's like and learn, because it's different, so it'll be interesting to see if any one of those bucks survived. It could be some potential there.
Along the lines of like finding small areas and just like having that efficiency of being able to check spots on the way home from work, or sneak a morning hunt in or something when you're hunting close to home. I've always thought if I could go back to high school days, college days, when I was spending more time where in the house where I grew up, one thing that I would change is I would just ask permission on any potential spot possible. Like, just get as many places, even if I didn't think they were the best spot, because when I was 18 years old or younger, I wanted the best spot and everything had to be super good. And I think that obviously everybody wants a good spot, but especially in like farm country where I was at that time, I think there's so much that changes year to year with crops and hunting pressure and there's so many variables that, maybe there's not a buck in a spot for 5, 6 years, but then all of a sudden there's that perfect storm of, crops in one spot and a lack of pressure in that area, and all of a sudden that, you know, nothing but a cornfield and a fence row is the place where he's at. And I'm always curious, is that
Yeah.
something that you kind of target a little bit, or do you just have kind of your
Yeah.
spots lined up that are, more historical, I guess?
It's kind of a mix of everything. So I mean, I literally I stretch across 4 different counties here in Michigan. So I mean, there's big public pieces that I hunt. There's little tiny public pieces. There's permission ground that has, you know, 8, 9 guys on it. There's a little spot like this, 2 acres, where I'm the only guy. It just really depends, but um, I feel like my efficiency around home, um, it I think it happens for a slightly different reason than my efficiency, like when I travel. Like when I travel, I rely a lot on like instinct and you're kind of on the fly and you're reading sign and you're observing and you're being super aggressive and almost trying to make something happen and trying to maximize your time in a short window. And I've been doing that so long traveling that I've become, pretty successful at it. Not every time, but I love that. I love just getting thrown into a new situation or a new type of habitat, and you're learning on the fly, and you're just letting those. You have no expectations, and you don't know anything about the property, so everything is just like instinctual. You're kind of in tune with your instincts of just letting them go and just kind of letting them guide you. And I've just fallen in love like with that feeling in that scenario. But then around home, I get a little bit of that, but the how I hunt or where I hunt, I am able to get out there and kind of be more in tune with what's going on real time. Not real time, but like I can walk around at lunch. I can go glass before work. I can go glass in the evening. I can go scout after work. So I'm actually got boots on the ground and I'm reading sign. Maybe I'm checking a camera. I'm out there kind of with the deer, so I'm more in tune with what's happening there and now. So when I do find something, I find some vulnerability with a buck. I find some hot stuff that pop up that looks like it's a mature animal, or I'm scouting just outside of a bedding area that I scouted in the spring, and all of a sudden there's a big sign popping up. Now I know, like, okay, now's the time. And it's a completely different type of efficiency. I actually hunt less like around home, and I do a lot more scouting. And then when I travel, I'm obviously like, I'm kind of scouting and hunting as I go.
Mm-hmm.
But around here, for the most part, because time is limited and I don't get the vacation time, I'm doing a lot more scouting. And then when things kind of look good and I get that gut feeling, like, I get that gut feeling or I get that observation and I know it's like time, then I kind of push everything aside and it's like, okay, I'm going in for the kill. I need a day or two or whatever. And if it doesn't happen, I kind of just start the process all over. So it's more of, I kind of, I tell I was talking to my buddy Justin about this. Like when I travel, like if like, let's say I travel in like October and I go somewhere and then I come back, I'm completely out of rhythm with what's going on at home, and when I'm here at home and I'm not traveling, I'm in like, I'm in rhythm with what's going on in the woods and in the swamps and stuff, because I'm out there and I'm checking and I'm walking edges and I'm reading the sign and I'm checking cameras and I'm glassing. It's like, I start to pick up on things or I see things. It's like, I get opportunities because I'm out there so much. So they're two different kind of styles that, that's the way I've hunted home and that's the way I've hunted it when I travel. And I kind of, work those two together the best I can.
Yeah, I think it's cool to see a difference, and there's probably a lot of it too that helps play into when you have that limited time. You're like, okay, I know whether you're traveling or at home, you're like, okay, this is the type of thing that I need to, pump the brakes and be like, I'm going to commit some time to it. And I'm sure that all plays together a little bit. And I think one question that I could see coming up a lot when a lot of people mention scouting and hunting, and like it's a tough thing to explain when you're at home though and you're going to go check an area. What does scouting look like? Because I think for a lot of people, it probably is like, well, scouting means just getting in there, looking at every little last detail. But I'm assuming that's not what you're doing, is going through every part of the property and combing it. You're probably going into kind of specific spots.
Yeah, so that can really depend. Like I do a lot of my boots on the ground, covering a lot of area like this time of year. As soon as that, even when the snow's in, but like immediately after season through, May, into May, kind of like in throughout turkey season, everything. I'm out there scouting, and that's when I'm really like trying to cover as many pieces as possible, trying to cover as much ground as possible to just kind of get the lay of the land, find where the bedding areas are, find where I think deer might be traveling through, what kind of food sources are in the area, and kind of get that feel for it. The areas that I'm always trying to add new stuff, but I'll go back to areas that I've hunted for years and years because I keep constantly picking up little things. Like I could, a spot that I've hunted for 10, 15 years, sometimes I'll go and I'll just be like, gosh, that tree right there. Like, they slip through here right alongside the road. And it's like, I never picked up on that, So I like to revisit places that I've hunted often. And then kind of like during the season, my scouting changes a little bit. So I would say it's a combination of a lot of different things. So if it's more of an open type ground scenario where I can utilize glassing, maybe cover is really limited, I'll use that a lot more long distance scouting, or maybe I'll have a camera or something in there that I can go in and check kind of in an area that's not too intrusive. But I try to just utilize my eyes because I have that advantage of open ground. And, that might not mean from the road. It might mean getting up in a tree and being able to glass from that, or, going up over a hill and getting to where you can see a low spot kind of along a creek bottom or something. But as I get into more like wooded ground or even like swamp or marsh, then I'm usually going in there. A lot of times I'll put cameras on sometimes some transition edge. If there's an apple tree or something I find, creek crossings, I really like scrapes. And I'll put those in spots that are very unintrusive, just to I want to more just know what deer are in there, like what kind of activity is overall is going on in the area. And then I kind of rely on the scouting that I did before in the spring to really know where to dive into. So I do a lot of, I guess, what I consider more perimeter scouting, and trying to get as accurate a picture as I can with what's going on inside, like who's in there, is he active, are the tracks coming out, out of the marsh, are the rub lines coming out, is this scrape active? So I'll do a lot of little spot checks like that. And I might do that 10, 12 times and never get that feeling like this is hot, this is the spot. And I just keep going until I get that feeling. And that's why you hear me say, I hunted 20 times and killed $5. It's because I'm so picky and choosy when I actually go in. Now, kind of conversely from that, I do this often a lot too. Sometimes I get my bow and I'll go into a piece of ground, whether it's completely unfamiliar or very familiar, and I'll just kind of still hunt and scout through there. Sometimes I don't have any idea what's going on. Sometimes I have somewhat of an idea, but I feel like, all right, I got to get in there and see into a more of a sensitive type area. I'm going to take my bow. I'm going to sneak in there. I'm going to still hunt. And I'm trying to read what's going on around me as I'm kind of slipping through. And, I'm trying to spot deer. I'm trying to read sign that's maybe, 50 yards, 80 yards ahead of me. And if I see something, I might sneak up there, and I'm constantly glassing, still hunting, stalking, all of it. And Sometimes I lay eyes on a buck, sometimes I bump into deer and I just slow down and I observe. Other times I find sign and I'm like, man, I need to set up here. I feel like this is the spot. So there's that's three different ways that I kind of scout in season, and I do all of those routinely. So all of them lead to opportunities. It just kind of depends on sometimes my mood.
Yeah.
My mood. Sometimes I'm just like I just want to get on the ground and I want to slip through. I call it like slip hunting, like you're just kind of slipping around and you're just trying to be like one with the woods, and you move when the wind blows or when there's some noise, and you might take a few steps, and you're doing a lot more glassing and observing than you are moving. And it's just kind of getting a feel for that woods and working through there. So I love that type of hunting, but sometimes I feel like I'm pretty good. Like I've heard you say like you get real impatient and you have trouble like sitting, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really good at when my instincts tell me to stop and sit,
Yeah.
I'm good at doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And if I get to a spot that say, this is an all day spot, like whatever during the rut, I can sit, dark to dark in one tree, like no problem. So I am good at kind of when my gut tells me to move or my gut tells me like this is a spot, I follow it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why when I see you hunt, when I hear you talk, it reminds me a lot of that way I mentioned that I do like to hunt,
Mm-hmm.
but I will often pick an ambush location that I think will work if the timing is right, or that buck is in there, or just the weather pattern is right, the wind is right. So it really just kind of goes to the best possible decision I can make at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times I'm just following my gut. I really am. I really listen to those instincts and just try to follow them. And they're not always right, but a lot of times they are.
Yeah. I like that. I like what you said too about when your gut tells you it's time to stop, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I do it very few times throughout the season, but when I do, it's the same deal. It's like, all right, this is it. And a lot of times there's just something there that tells you what you need for the confidence to commit the time to doing that. I think that the reason that I keep moving so much, so many times, is I'm not getting some sort of really good confirmation that this is it. And I've
Mm-hmm.
I've chose to not hunt with trail cameras, and it's something that I'm really um, happy with. But at the same time, there's a lot of times where I feel like, that trail camera picture would be the confirmation. But when you find the spot
Mm-hmm.
that has the sign that's just blitz, there's scrapes, there's rubs, or maybe there's not even that. There's a place that I hunted in Ohio a few years ago where we just happened to catch a visual on a chase the day before, and we moved up there and ended up I ended up messing up on that one. It was, I don't know if you've ever seen the video where I rattle with my buddy Keith. I rattle this buck that's cruising below us, and my bow's behind me. Just honestly, one of those ones that I have to go back and watch and just feel the pain of every once in a while because I deserve it for that stupid mistake. But that spot though really didn't have that much sign right in the spot where we were set up, but around
Mm-hmm.
it there was more sign than anywhere else we had walked for days prior. And then once we knew we wanted to hunt up on that ridge and in those creek bottoms around it, it was like, day in and day out. And I have a lot of memories like that, but they're all a little different. And, sometimes it's like the visual, sometimes it's, a scrape, sometimes it's some rubs, but I think every time it's a little bit different. And I'm curious, like, what are a couple stories or your best story of hitting that sign or that moment where you're like, okay, this is it, and what details led you to have the confidence to commit time to that area?
Well, let me think here.
This is what I'm most excited about for those listening, is I just want to hear the details.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There's so many kind of that. Sometimes it's a lot of sign, like you said, and sometimes it's not sign at all. It's more the 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 connection between different areas that have sign. Like for instance, my Ohio buck from 2 years ago. Uh, if you walked that ground where I killed that buck, you probably wouldn't think it's worth hunting at all. Now I killed him during the rut, and there were does there, so you probably would have been like, this is a rut spot. Like most good woodsmen would come to that conclusion. But if you were just going off big buck sign alone, um, you would probably pass through it because it didn't have real good cover. It was more open ground. It was basically a little creek drainage. Was only, I mean, you could darn near throw a football across it. It's so narrow, and it just kind of snakes through this wide, flat ag ground. And yeah, when you walk through there, you see some doe sign, you'll see some little rubs and stuff, but nothing that indicates there was a big 5-year-old buck living in there or even using it. Um, but it was a combination of a couple years of observing him, like actually getting a visual. And then once I saw him do the same thing 2 times in a row, or almost the same thing 2 years in a row, um, then I knew like, okay, I can monitor this area with glassing. I can monitor this area with a trail camera. But what this buck was doing is he's coming out of this piece of private ground, and he was actually using the open ground, like the ag fields, as like a safety, because the cover was so limited. And you're familiar with this area of
Mm-hmm.
Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
northern Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
So what this buck was doing was, the hunters are all in the little blocks of timber and the little hedgerows and little pieces of cover. Well, this buck clearly knew that because he was going way out into the field and using the openness for safety. And I saw him do that 2 years in a row. And he did the same thing. He came out of this bedding area, which was on some private ground that I couldn't access. He went way out into the field. One year I saw him do it. The next year he did it, and I was in position right on the field edge trying to get a shot at him, and he got downwind of me in the field and busted me. And but he was getting out there downwind of all the cover, and then he was heading up towards that little drainage I was telling you that had the does in it.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't going through the cover and laying down sign. He was out in the open, making a beeline to that drainage. So he was actually leaving more tracks like out in the egg field. Now it was slightly rolling and not visible from the road. So he was hidden from the road, but not hidden necessarily if you were like set up along that woods edge. So I actually how I got on that buck was two things. I had a camera that was really easy to access right in that drainage, right on the edge. And I had made a little scrape there and just put a camera on it, something I can sneak up, check it. And I started picking up him at night in October. I can't remember. It was like mid-October. Like, it was nothing all season. Then all of a sudden it's like, boom, there he is at midnight, and he's in there with the does, and then nothing during daylight. I was like, okay, he's getting interested now. He's coming and he's checking. And then it was 4 or 5 days, and then boom, you get another one. And it's like 11 o'clock at night. So you're starting to figure out like, okay, it's not time yet, right? It's not time. And it was getting to late October. It might've been right around Halloween, but I went in there and I snuck in and I checked that camera, and I got my first daylight picture of him. And I was like, all right, he's in here now. He's starting to use this area now. So I couldn't hunt until, I think it was November 5th was the day I killed him. And I got out of work and I buzzed down there. And so it's kind of hard to explain, but that the way this drainage sets up, he comes out of this piece of private ground, goes out in the open, and then he kind of walks through the field and he kind of angles up into that drainage. But he's so far into the field, it's like you can't sit on the field edge and get like a good close shot. He's like out there to get downwind of everything. For other people hunting the area too, kind of intermittently. But there was this one little corner on the edge where I had observed him before where goes out in the open, he starts angling up into that drainage, and he's like, and it's a far shot, but like maybe, just maybe, you might be able to get one like right at your max range, like he's kind of angling up in there. So I grabbed my bow and I went out there, and I was cutting through that field, and all I was doing was like looking for his set of tracks, because he would always do that. So it's like I knew I could cut his tracks. It's real sandy soil out there. And I finally cut his tracks, and I start following his tracks a little bit, and I'm kind of looking at the field edge, and I'm ranging. I'm like, okay, that's 50 yards. All right, that's 40 yards right there. And you could see where he had walked. And I was like, that's a poke, but maybe just if he's broadside and he's calm or whatever, that's about as far as I'd want a whitetail. That's really pushing it. And but I thought that was my best chance. I could have. Some of my friends asked me, like, why didn't you get into the drainage where the does were? Well, I don't know. I just felt like I didn't want to get in there, and I didn't know where they were. And then I like bust these deer out, and they start blowing, and who knows where they go. You know how that is out there. It's like, it's so open. You bust them out of one thing of cover, they go to the next one that's a half mile away.
And that might be where he is.
Exactly. I didn't want to alert any deer, and I knew I could get to that edge right there, undetected. So I got up in a tree, and sure enough, I'm observing this little buck. I sit there for a couple hours, but I'm observing this little buck that's coming through the cover, the funnel, like I wish this big one would. And I'm just watching him, and I'm holding real still. And then out of the corner of my eye, I just see something trotting like this behind me out in the field. And I look, and here he is at like a full trot going right through the open, out in the open field there, right downwind. And I'm like, oh shoot, I don't even have my bow in my hand. So this was crazy. And it was all like instinctual to do this. Like, I got to get him to stop. I knew where my window was, and I knew where my scent stream's blowing. And I just go burp. And I slowly grab my bow. I'm not even looking at him. I grab my bow like this, and I pull it in, and I'm twisting like this super slow. Now I'm kind of up on a ridge a little bit, and he's below me. And I turn, and he's stopped broadside, and he's looking in a direction, but he's looking below me, where a deer would be. And I'm just slowly doing this, and I come to full draw all in one motion, and I put the pin on him, and just perfect shot, man. Just perfect shot. He takes off. We end up finding him not far away, but what was so cool about that was the fact that I had observed him enter this area doing that a couple different times. And then I was able to just on a track alone, figure out where that spot was. There was really one spot where I felt I could get in and maybe have a shot. And it was a longer shot. And if things, worked out perfectly, he was broadside. I felt like I could make it happen. But I stopped him. But one of the reasons I stopped him, well, two reasons. One, the window was short. The shooting window was not very wide. But the second one is like, I knew he was going to hit my scent stream. I wanted to stop him before he hit my scent stream, because then it's over. Yep. So it was a very rushed situation, but like I didn't even think about what I was doing, but I knew why I was doing it. Yeah. You know what I mean? It was just instinctual. Like, I got to stop him now or it's not going to happen. 10 more yards, he's downwind of me. So it was just a really cool hunt. Like, every once in a while, I'm sure you felt like this. You pull off a hunt and you're just like, that was pretty good. Like I did pretty good there. Yeah. It doesn't always happen that way. A lot of times I'm feeling like how bad I screwed up, but so another one that I think is a little different was an actual my last time I hunted Iowa, and I've told this story, but it's just such a good story because I really think that it shows like the power of having kind of multiple things in your favor. And again, we talk about big buck sign and this hot sign and everything. And yeah, man, I think especially like outside of the rut, that can be a great way to get on deer, can be a great way to get on big deer, but some big deer don't lay down a lot of sign, and I think a lot of that has to do too with, when I go to Iowa, I see like 10 times more sign than I see here in Michigan.
Yeah.
And when I go to Ohio, I see 5 times more sign. And I think it's because, there's so much more competition there with bucks. They got a healthy age structure. There's 2-year-old bucks, there's 3-year-old bucks, there's 4, and there's a couple 5-year-olds. And it's like there's a healthy competition there, and there's sign being laid down, marking territory. Where in Michigan, it might be like 3 1/2-year-old bucks and a 2-year-old buck, and then maybe if you're lucky, a 3 or 4-year-old buck. And it's like he doesn't have competition. He doesn't have to rip up sign. If you're really good at finding things, you'll pick up little clues. You'll find a track. You'll find the little antler tick marks like in a tree where he'll just bang his antler on. You'll find those little holes, those little nicks. But it's not always like ripped up, shredded, like in your face sign. Like, oh man, this is it. So this Iowa spot, I went down there in the spring and scouted this spot. It was a piece of walk-in ground and not very big. It was a couple 100 acres, but mostly open. But what was unique about it, it had these little drainage ditches, ravines, and it had 3 of them. So it was basically open, kind of like pasture ground. Then it had these 3 ravines, like consecutive, like one, then it was open ground, then another one, open ground, and then another one. So it's like, you zoom out, you're looking at the aerial, you're like, okay, to the south, there's like this giant piece of private ground, great bedding area. And you're like, all right, that's going to hold some deer, right? And then you see these ravines, deer like to travel in those ravines. They'll bed in them sometimes, whatnot. But you look to the north, and there's like all this great ag. So you got this major, like substantial piece of cover to the south, big piece of private ground. And then you got all this ag to the north, great, again, private ground. And then you got this little piece here with these little ravines. And I was like, man, I think deer, clear travel routes going from south to north where they can stay down in those ravines. So I went there in March and I walked up and down those ravines, and when I say there was no buck sign, like I couldn't find anything. Like there was some real faint trails, like some little scrubs, and I was like, man, this is like really underwhelming. But I go to that middle ravine, and there's this tree that had kind of tipped over, I don't know what happened. It kind of broke and tipped over. It was still alive, but it was hanging. It was creating this awesome like overhang branch. And I look under it and I just see this like major scrape. And I'm like, man, look at that thing. Like that's torn up. But there was no other big buck sign around. And I was like, okay. So there was definitely some travel trails, some faint trails just kind of going, north and south, running north and south. And I was like, all right, this thing has a couple things going for it. I got the best cover, darn near in the county to the south. It looks like at least substantial, like big block of cover, like unbroken. Got great ag to the north. Then you got these traps out here. But this one in the middle has this awesome primary scrape that's clearly hit. Like it's been worked for years. And I was like, this is going to be a good spot. That late October, that early November timeframe when they're hitting scrapes, the bucks are moving. They're not locked down yet. I was like, I think this is, and you get that through experience. You find yourself in a scenario. And it's like, okay, it feels like, everything's telling me it feels like it should be good in this window, in that window in late October where they're really nailing those scrapes to early November where they're still hitting the scrapes, but they're starting to look for those and cover some ground. And then like by that second week in November, like those scrapes just shut off, right? They go cold and there's leaves in them and stuff. But, the big bucks don't necessarily ignore those scrapes. I think they're there for a reason, but they don't really work them. So like if you have a camera on them, that they start going cold and it's like, you might be like, man, they're off the scrapes or whatever, but they're still working through that area. Because it's a scent checking area too, it's there for a reason because the does are moving through. So, I'm thinking about this. All right, I got a couple things in my feet. I got a sweet bed to feed travel route, 3 of them. One in the middle has an awesome primary scrape. There's 2 things that I have going for me. And then the fence line right there that connect, that is the line where that great piece of private ground is with all that cover. I was like, okay, if I'm getting a southerly wind, now I'm on the downwind side of that doe bedding too. So I was like, all of a sudden, it's like there's 3 things that I really like to key in on, kind of all happening at once here. And I was like, I think this could be a good spot. So I went down there and took my first trip down there late October. The wind was bad for the first night. I sat there one time, and I had like a 2-year-old buck come through. He hit the scrape, and it was a pretty slow evening. So I ended up going to a different piece of public ground and had a freaking unbelievable hunt. I think I rattled in 7 bucks with one sequence.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was insane, dude. It was insane. Like good bucks too, and one giant, and I could have shot every buck except the giant. He was the one that hung up. But
of course.
Yeah. So I didn't get anything that trip. I only had 3.5 days. Came back to Michigan, ended up killing an Ohio buck, the buck I was after, and then I got him cleaned up, went to bed, and woke up early the next morning and buzzed back down to Iowa. And I was really excited to get back in that spot. So the very first morning, I climbed back in that spot, and finally got that southerly wind. It's kind of blowing like southeast. And I don't know if you remember that year in Iowa, but it was that year where it would have been November. I shot him on November 6th or 7th, but it was really warm. Do you remember that warm spell in Iowa, 2020?
I was in Ohio at that time, but yeah, it was brutal in Ohio too. It was 75 degrees and stale every day. It was honestly the worst November hunting I've ever experienced as far as weather conditions.
That's when it was. That's when it was, because it was like I looked and the high was going to be like 73. And I'm like, oh God. But those mornings, those warm snaps can be good, because it's like, it's hot all day and they're sluggish and the does aren't moving, the bucks aren't moving much. And then it gets that night activity really ramps up. And then if you get those cold or those cooler temps, until like 9 or 10 o'clock, those can be awesome, because the rest of the day is so subdued because of the warm weather. So you can get a really awesome window there of activity, even on those really hot days during the rut. But anyway, so I sneak in there and I get up in this tree, and the scrape is like, it's cleared off, and I'm like, man, this feels good. So I'm pretty much right on the property line. Like I wanted to be right downwind of that bedding area in case I caught bucks moving east to west, scent checking that way, or, getting deer coming back from the ag, down this way. But it's blowing kind of southeast. So it's not blowing me right up the ravine. It's kind of blowing me kind of out and up into the field there. So I thought I was safe. And I don't know, it was like 9 o'clock, 9:30 maybe. I look out in that field and I just see a big, mature 10-pointer. I mean, he looked like a 4 or 5-year-old buck, just big, mature, beautiful, mid 150s buck coming across, doing exactly what I thought he was going to do, but downwind of me. Like he wasn't right on the edge. He was actually out, a good 50 yards, coming perpendicular to those, all those ravines. So he's going through one, coming up, going through the next one, coming up, going through the next one. So he's smelling what's downwind of that bedding area, and he's crossing all those doe trails one by one, nose to the ground, and he's just doing what bucks do, and I knew that's what bucks did. I miscalculated a little bit. If I was 30 yards that way, I would have had a crack at him. So I watch him and I see him coming. I'm like, oh God, he's gonna hit my scent stream. So I knew where my scent was blowing, and I kind of did something that was a little risky, but I felt like he was going to smell me for sure if he got downwind. So I actually grunted to him before he hit my scent stream, because I thought maybe I can turn him,
Yeah, it's worth a shot.
But anyway, yeah, I just feel confident because, those ravines are low, and I was kind of down about halfway, but I was up in a tree, and then he was kind of coming up over the rise, and it's like the wind was blowing there, the thermals are going there. I just didn't feel good about it, but I thought maybe, blow a grunt, maybe he comes in, on that string, and my scent misses him. Well, he ends up, he stops, he hears me, he ends up kind of going more downwind of me, kind of like I thought he might. And he ends up getting my wind, and he turns around and runs off. And I'm like, dang it. So I look, and I'm kind of looking through my glass, and I can see kind of like a faint little trail up there where clearly bucks have done this before that I think I missed before when I was scouting. Or at least I could kind of see the route he was going, and I looked, and I felt like I kind of see a trail there, and I was like, man, should I move? Should I move up there? And I was kind of contemplating it back and forth. And all of a sudden, as I'm thinking about it, I hear deer walking. Crunch, crunch, crunch. And I'm like, but it's coming from the opposite way, but doing the same exact thing on that same trail. And I put my binoculars up, and I just see tines, like just tines everywhere. Like the craziest rack I've ever seen. And I'm like, no way. So he's doing the same exact thing, just going the opposite direction. So what these bucks were doing, they were doing what I thought. They're downwind of the doe bedding, but they were checking those travel routes, crossing them, perpendicular, smelling the trails. And this buck was doing the same thing. He was just going the opposite way. But what I had in my favor here was my wind was blowing to the southeast, and he's coming this way. So I have a little more wind to play with. And he's coming, and I'm like, all right, what do I do? Because he's going to pass out of range. Well, he gets about right straight north of me, which is still, my wind's missing him. And he stops. He puts his nose up, and I'm like, oh man, he's got me. Well, he's smelling this. Remember how I told you, like, bucks will still use those scrapes. They might not go and work them, but they're smelling them. Mm-hmm. Does come by, they go by those scrapes. He's checking it. He stops right when he's downwind of that scrape, and he turns 90 degrees and starts walking into it. And he's basically coming right at the base of my tree, but he's doing like an arc kind of up towards that scrape. So I'm here, I'm in my saddle, and here he comes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's coming head on. And I draw back, he's like 15 yards away, and I draw back, and I'm like this, and he's straight down, and he gets right kind of at the base of my tree, and he's like looking over at the scrape, and all of a sudden he goes, and he goes like this. He looks right up at me, and he just opens all this up here. It just gives me a clear path, like boom. So I just let him have it right there at like, I don't know, 4 or 5 yards.
That's sweet.
But it was the shortest track job I've ever had. I mean, just a deadly shot. But it was super cool because, again, not a lot of buck sign, but it was capitalizing on buck behavior in that window. I had the scrape, so I knew that window of that late October, early November, that like 2-week period right there where primary scrapes are hot, they're moving, and then as you get more into that like first week of November, now they're really starting to look for does. So it was just, it had a lot of 2, 3, 4 things going for me in that spot. But again, if you were just going on, big buck sign alone, you probably would have passed by that spot. There wasn't even a lot of doe sign in it. It kind of looks, other than that scrape, it looked pretty bleak, but man, it really did heat up, during that time.
That example really reminds me of that hunt and that setup where Keith and I had the whole bow behind me deal. As far as, where the sign was, it was in the creeks that were paralleling the ridge that we were set up on. They were just crossing over that ridge in one little pinch point. And as far as the trail goes, I mean, it's just an average looking little deer trail carved in some steeper terrain. I mean, it's definitely steep right in that spot, but there was rocks that kind of pinned them down to that specific point. And I mean, the one that we rattled in did exactly what we wanted. I mean, he came even closer than the trail, which ultimately kind of hurt us because if it had he not, I might have been able to get to my bow. But it's very similar in that spot. Close by, there was some really good sign. And actually, I just went back and watched this video because, again, just have to kind of drill it into the brain a little bit. And I also think it's just a funny video. It's super cool encounter, but I remember, or I remembered from watching the video, how on the way in, down in the creek bottom, there was a scrape that was obliterated. It was two hoof marks perfectly carved out from that night or something, within the last 24 hours for sure. Probably less than 10 hours, honestly. And same deal there, though. Just not always a ton of sign in the immediate area of the setup. And that differs a lot from a spot that Keith and I hunted in Minnesota this past season, where we were setting up on scrapes that were, right on one line trail all the way through the block that we were hunting. And it's like one spot can look like that and the next can be totally different, but it is interesting
Yeah.
to see. And one question that I had from the first story was, you mentioned looking through that field for his track. Had you had a
Mhm.
past um, experience where you were identifying that track from something specific, or were you just looking for the biggest track crossing the field and assuming it was his?
Yeah, that's a good question because that particular area, as far as I knew, from glassing, from a couple of years of trail camera data, from observing, from hunting it, there was no other buck of that age
Mm-hmm.
and of that size. There were some 2-year-old deer, some year and a half, of course, but he was, and I run into that a lot here in Michigan. And in some ways, I complain about Michigan not having a good age structure and sometimes not even a fully mature deer to chase. But can say is that when you find, a big track or big sign, it's, of a big buck in that area, it's usually him because there's usually not multiple. I'm not saying there's never like that.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly you can get some 3-year-olds that play some big signs. Sometimes they're the most aggressive. But in this particular, just because I had seen him do that and I knew he was like the big dog in the area, um, I knew if I cut a big set of tracks that it was most likely going to be him. I mean, it was the rut; anything could have happened. But um, yeah, I had seen him do that, multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt pretty confident. But one thing you mentioned about, like, I was trying to think of some hunt. I was like, okay, let's think of a hunt where, I did see like red hot sign, like blazing, like big buck sign, where I was able to capitalize on that. And there was one this year. So there was a buck in Michigan. He was pretty much the main buck I wanted to kill. He's this 10-point, big, heavy beams. For here, he's a giant. And I started learning about this deer. I obviously he was around before, but I could not place like what deer this was. I hadn't hunted that area in multiple years, so it's just like. But I had a camera out there, and I was looking through pictures and stuff. Um, couldn't really figure out what this deer was because I just wanted to I wanted to try to get some history, get some information. Maybe I had a picture of him last year. Like, what was he doing? When did he show up? Like, where was he coming from or going to? And there was just nothing. But there was this big buck that was just like seemed to suddenly appear out here, and I quickly noticed. I got one picture of him. I went out there and scouted once, and I was able to observe him do this just from like an observation stand. But I saw him coming out of the marsh from a certain direction and coming up into this piece of high ground here where there was like some white oaks. And the direction he was coming from out of the marsh, there is an oxbow, like a little peninsula.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's this creek out in the marsh that kind of winds through, and there's a spot like up by the road almost where it kind of goes back and then it loops right up back by the road. And he always came from there. So I was like, I think he's bedding on that oxbow some of the time because he had to be coming from there because either that or he's crossing the river, and deer don't typically do that. They certainly can, but Um, I just know what I know about like creeks and rivers, especially in like the marshes and stuff. Yeah, they like to bet on those oxbows often. So I started uh, I started to kind of put a plan together, like where I might be able to intercept this buck if he was bedding there. But I was trying to. This is a very sensitive area. Like it's this was right by the road, and you get up off the road, you come through a little bit of hardwoods, and it dips down into this marsh, and it's like, I mean, you're right there, like right off the road, like crunch crunch with your feet, and he can hear you. So it's one of those things where I wanted to make sure the timing was right. I wanted to make sure he was. I had a hunch that's what he was doing at least some of the time, and I wanted to make sure that I nailed the timing down when he was moving a lot in daylight. And I didn't want to go in there too early and ruin my chance because it's just one of those small spots where you just feel like you're going to get one crack, if he's in there. So I was kind of relying more on, I guess I was relying a little bit on some trail. I didn't have a trail camera over there, but I had a trail camera about 100 yards to the east on a scrape. And then there was a little field up there, right on the edge of where those white oaks were. And that's the spot where I would typically kind of walk a lot. I'll often walk like the edge of like a field or an opening, trying to see what the sign is on the edge that will tell me what's going on in the marsh, like a track, scrapes that are open up, a big rub. And then it tells me like, okay, now there's a big buck in here. Because to your point earlier, when you said like those historical trends, that timing can be really important with some of these deer. And if you go in too early when he's not there, you kind of booger the area up, you bump and doze around and you're pressuring the area. But if you can kind of keep tabs and read from kind of the outside in, you can sometimes nail that timing down, like right when that buck shows up. You got a window there where he's vulnerable. Or it might be from years past where, you've hunted it kind of intermittently through the season. You're like, man, I never see any bucks here. Early October, never, mid-October, I start seeing some 2-year-olds, and come late October, I start seeing some, 3-year-old bucks. So that timing can be really important. And I wanted to be real careful that not to push in too early. So I would walk that edge. I would check that camera once in a while. And then all of a sudden, right on the edge of those oaks and that opening, I started getting some rubs popping up, some pretty big rubs. But there's other good deer in this area. So I wasn't convinced it was him, but they're good sized rubs. And then I start seeing some tracks, and I'm like, okay. So I check that camera, he's not on there. And I just start doing this routinely, like every, 5 days or so. I kind of go out there at my lunch hour or whenever, and I'm just kind of walking that, because this was the buck that I wanted to kill. And I start walking that area, and I start seeing more tracks. Now I'm seeing a couple different sets of big buck tracks, and these rubs are, popping up here and there. And then finally I checked that card, and he's on there. And I was like, okay, he's kind of starting to come out this way. And now we're getting into like that November, early November time frame. But I need the way this is set up, I need like a northern wind to be able to hunt that oxbow properly. And it's just, I can't remember exactly, but I just remember getting like all these southern winds this year. And I wanted to hunt out there so bad. And it's just like, I couldn't, because the wind was always wrong. And I'm trying to hunt this buck coming out of this oxbow. And it's like, I need to get it perfect. And finally, oh no, I misspoke. I needed like a southeast type wind, because the way this oxbow went, it went out into the marsh and it went like to the north. Okay. So usually when bucks are bedding on an oxbow, they like the wind to kind of come down through the oxbow, and they're kind of bedded out there, along the river. So they like that wind kind of coming from mainland down that oxbow. So, straight south would have kind of blew me right into them, but like something out of like the east, southeast, it's kind of, I'm right up against the water's edge, where at least where I wanted to be. And it would kind of blow me across the river, but it's still kind of blowing towards him. So that's what I was waiting for, kind of like that perfect wind. And then finally, I felt like the timing is right. Like he's moving, he's in the area, he's moving during daylight. It was November 7th. And I snuck in there, and I actually took a tree stand, and I was going to try to sit up really low. So I get in there. I mean, I get like 30, 40 yards off this road, and I'm like looking around. It's kind of breezy, but it's not like super windy. And I'm like looking at these trees, and I'm like, gosh, I mean, the oxbow is only 100 yards deep, maybe, so he could be bedded at 70, he could be bedded at 90. And I'm looking at these trees, and I'm like, I don't think I can even get up in them. I think he'll hear me. So I was like, I got to hunt from the ground. So I start, there's lots of like dead limbs around. So I start slow, as the wind blew, I'm picking up these dead limbs, and I'm just kind of stacking them in front of this tree. And I create like this like little makeshift ground blind. And I was like, the tree's big, it's bigger than my shoulders. And I get tucked in there. And all of a sudden, I get all set up, and I see movement coming out of the oxbow, and I look, and it's a doe. And she comes out, and she gets up into that high ground, and immediately she locks onto me, and she takes off. But she doesn't go back to the oxbow, but she takes off this way. And I'm like, that's not good. That's not good enough. So I start stacking more, and then I start stacking them like this. So it's really breaking up my outline now, but I got like this awesome little makeshift blind. And I don't know, it's an hour before dark, and all of a sudden I catch movement, and here he comes, like this big white rack. And he's come by the time I see him, it's like he's already way too close. Like he's coming right at me. He's already too close. And I'm like behind this brush pile, and he's walking like right towards me. And I'm like, oh my God. And I start like laying down like this, just to kind of lower my head below eye level. So my head and everything is below the brush pile. And he walks so close to me, Zach, that I'm here like this, like my shoulder like is on the ground, and I'm looking up, and he's standing like over me, like he's feet in front of this brush blind, and he's standing above me, and I can see his neck and his head and his rack like right there, dude, like in my face. And I'm like, oh my God, and then all of a sudden he sees, I think it was that doe or a different doe kind of like out in front of him, and all of a sudden he kind of like starts trotting towards him. So I immediately stand up, and I come to full draw, and I go burp, and he stops, and he turns, and he's like perfectly quartering away at like 20 yards. And I don't know what I did, man. I completely screwed up. I just drill him right in the shoulder. I mean, just quartering away, like just aim back, right?
Yeah.
Just aim back, dummy. And I tucked it in too close. I thought I made a good shot. I thought I hit the offside shoulder, but stuck him, and the arrow sticking out, and he takes off. And call my buddy. We go out there, and immediately, you know when you hit a shoulder, because I was like, if I kill him, he's going to be dead inside 100 yards, and we're going, and it looks like a shoulder hit. There's no bubbles, and we end up pretty much following it till it peters out. I came back the next day, even though I felt very strongly he was alive. Did a walkabout and never found him. So I was completely devastated. Just freaking, I was a sourpuss for weeks. And it was so the rest of bow season comes, all of gun season came in at November 15th. I had some other bad things happen to me. I was like, oh man, it was a crazy year, man. Just a tough year emotionally. And it goes to, I think our last day of gun was like, I can't remember what day was it. December 12th. So it was our last day of gun season, and I pretty much had enough. And I told myself, I'm going to go out and try to shoot a doe, and I'm just going to try to end the season on a high note. And but like I constantly had been thinking about that buck, and I was like, just something like, is he still out there? Like, I hit him in the shoulder. He's probably alive. Oh, he's probably long gone. He's hiding, somewhere. But I'm like, I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna shoot a doe if I see one. I was like, but I'm gonna kind of sit like maybe where he'll walk through,
Yeah, yeah.
So I didn't get back in that same spot, but what I did is I did go over there that direction, and I got right on the edge of the marsh and where all those oaks are and stuff. And I felt like, if he's in here and he's out in the marsh, kind of pinches down there where the oxbow comes through. I mean, I was off of where that oxbow was, probably 90 yards, but I was still in an area where he could travel through. I mean, there was some sign there that, from earlier in the fall and whatnot, but I was totally going to shoot a doe, dude. And if I was targeting a doe, I would actually sat back more in the field and probably just tried to do it that way. But I was like, I want to give myself a chance in case, he comes through here, or in case I see him. And I just thought it would be a huge win if I see him out in the marsh. Just let me see him and I'll be the happiest guy in the world.
Confirm he's still out there.
And yeah. This is a lot. So it was 15, let me think, 15. It was like it was like the 26th day of our gun season. And I'm out there with my bow, and I'm sitting there, and I mean, it's a good hour and a half before dark. And I'm just kind of I look out in the marsh and I see like this white thing, and I'm like, what? I get my glass up and I'm like, holy crap, that's him. And he's out there, like, just, as big as ever, his white rag just as clear as day. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, dude. You got to be kidding me. And I'm like, no way. And I'm like, dude, I'm happy, and he's kind of standing there, and all of a sudden he starts walking, and he's got this limp, right? I'm like, dude, that's him, here, but he's kind of walking towards me. And I was like, there's no way this is going to happen. Like, I'm just like, no way. And here he comes. And every once in a while he stops, he's looking around, and he's coming right towards me, and I can hardly believe it. And so I think what I had going for me, I've thought about this quite a bit. What I think I had going for me was like, I drilled this buck in the shoulder, right? Mm-hmm. And he went wherever he went. And then I never went back. Like, I didn't go for gun season. I just stayed the heck out of there. Well, the gun pressure around there is just crazy. I mean, they do drives, they sit, they hunt every day. Mm-hmm. Everybody shoots everything. And I think he got pushed back in there, back to his home, and he didn't really know what happened. I mean, he knew he got stung by something, but he never smelled me, he never saw me, and that's the only thing I can make sense of. But he was back in there, and he came right out of that freaking oxbow. He came right out of that same spot. And here he comes, man, and he's moving well before daylight, and he does, man. He looks like he's getting around, but he looks like he's struggling. And there's, a quarter of a mile, 500-600 yards this way is ag, like good. He's making his way, but he's not breaking cover, dude. And it was like it was fate, man. He came right to me, and he offered me a 22-yard shot, and I put him down.
That's awesome. I mean,
it was unreal. I had never killed a buck that I had shot and wounded, and got on him again. But it was the most rewarding deer. He's not my biggest deer by a long shot, but he's a great deer. I can't think of one that's more rewarding, and I admit, like, there wasn't a whole lot of like skill involved here. I mean, I got lucky. Like, I went out there to shoot a doe. Like, if a doe came out first, I would have shot a doe. Yeah. And but it was just like, sometimes things just happen out there, and you're just like, man, it's just meant to be. So, but that in particular, that hunt was more of, okay, signs popping up. There were rubs that were like shredded coming out of that. I forgot to mention that, but coming out of that oxbow, when I went over there with the tree stand and I was going to set up, I looked in there, and there's like big rub, kind of going back in there. And I was like, all right, he's he's in here and he's using this. And then up around that opening up there by the oaks, I mean, it was torn up too by him and some other bucks. So that one was a little more obvious, like hot sign that I was able to capitalize on, and some just good problem solving and judgment there, by kind of guessing where he was betting. But that was kind of a cool hunt.
Yeah, it's cool too because even though you say you got lucky, there's even if that is 100% true, which I don't totally believe that it's 100% true, there's still, a lot of skill that goes into picking a spot where even just a deer is going to come past you in bow range. But moving forward now, everybody can take something away from that story as far as if there's pressure in the surrounding areas and you've been kind of laying low or not ignoring an area, letting it rest, then you can go back in there late season. I mean, that's definitely beneficial. And I mean, late season hunting like that's definitely a struggle, but kind of picking and choosing your times of going in and kind of letting the pressure get that spot to where he's comfortable in there again, obviously worked in your favor because sounds like that was pretty early too. Like that he came past in the evening.
Yeah, it was way earlier than I would expect from a big mature deer. But I think he was a shell of what he was like in his prime, like earlier in the year. I mean, he was a big bodied deer. I mean, you'd see pictures of him and it was like he was huge. And when I saw him, when I hit him in the shoulder, I mean, he was giant. Like his neck and his belly and his back and everything is like those every once in a while you see those bucks where like their neck comes down and it hits those shoulders and they go up like that, like they got this big hump.
Yep.
I mean, he was just like he was a beast, and he was worn down. Like his spine, you could see he looked like he looked like he lost 60, 70 pounds. I don't know how much, but he was a shell of what he was. But, he was alive. He was moving to food. He seemed to be getting around okay. And this was interesting. So I was curious, like where my shot was, the initial shot. So I found it, it was healed over. There was a thin piece of skin on it. And I kind of like, I touched it and it just immediately broke right open, but it was like starting to heal. And then I look, and he's got this big giant hole in his chest. And I'm like, dude, he either got shot in his chest, like a frontal, or another buck or something. But he had a big hole right here too. And I'm like, man, what a warrior.
Yeah.
Just a warrior. But yeah, it was pretty cool, man. That really made my season, to be honest with you. I had a great season overall, but there was a lot of heartache and some bad stuff that happened. But man, I was just so relieved and satisfied with that buck. It felt really good.
I was gonna ask one of the questions, and maybe you kind of got to it already with that story of hitting him prior, but I noticed you had made a post back kind of shortly after the season ended and said something along the lines of like, it was basically I got the vibe that you were feeling unsatisfied and that you had made some mistakes. There was things you wanted to improve on.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that you learned or feel like you could improve on specifically moving forward?
Yeah, this year was it was man. There's so many. I had a podcast with the fall Aaron Blasey, the fall podcast, where I kind of went over pretty much the whole season. And yeah, I had a great season. I killed 4 big bucks, but there was a lot of mistakes. You wouldn't think I would be like a seasoned veteran hunter if you followed me around. I don't think this year, but a couple things. Honestly, they're very like beginner level stuff that you would be taught. When or you would learn when you're first starting to hunt. But I think that I started to get a little maybe overconfident or not even just think of like those basic fundamental things that can be the key to having a successful hunt. Like just, um, you know, if you're going to get up in a tree, getting where the cover is. Like I started to feel confident where I could set up anywhere and make it happen because I had done it, like, a lot of times I'll hunt low, like in the saddle, like literally like really low, sometimes at ground level with the saddle just hiding behind the tree or 5 feet up or 8 feet up. And I've killed some really big bucks doing that the last few years, but I sure got busted a lot this year, like a lot. And they were picking me off and they were seeing me moving. And I felt like I was a little more fidgety and my head wasn't in the game as much. My shots, I wasn't happy with my shooting. I mean, I made some great shots on some deer, and then that one in the shoulder, and then I had another one that happened with the gun. I don't know. I think I just kind of need to revisit my whole shot process and stuff. It wasn't like punching the trigger. I don't do that. I executed a good shot, but I think I don't know. I don't know what it is. And maybe it just got a little quick with it or whatever. But anytime you wound a deer or two in a season, it's like you kind of have to rethink some things. Like, okay, is that just a fluke, or is there some things I can probably work on? And I think there is. It's just even
Always
for
is.
guys like us.
Yeah, always
for
is.
guys like us, just kind of going back to the drawing board, some of the basics, and working on those fundamentals. I felt like a lot of my hunts this year, I just wasn't very, I just felt like I wasn't as stealthy, as sneaky. Maybe my head wasn't in the game, but it felt like almost every time I entered any type of timber, the woods knew I was there, and I usually don't feel that way. I usually feel like I'm kind of one with the woods, and I kind of disappear into the woods, and I move with the shadows and the wind, and I can kind of slip through and get up on animals. And I had some hunts like that where I was still hunting. There was this one, man, I was still hunting in Ohio. It was one of those days where it was like, I just felt like taking the bow and slipping through some cover, and I knew there was a good buck in there somewhere. But I didn't quite know where, and I just wanted to kind of test the skills. And I was on it that day, man. I was slipping through, and I come up over this rise, and there's like a group of does bedded there. There's like 6 or 7 of them, and they're right there, like 8 yards, and like they have no idea I'm there. I'm like, this is badass.
Yeah.
And I kind of slowly backed out, and then I worked up around them and never even alerted them. And but then there were other days where I felt like, I step out of my car and there's deer flying this way, and I break timber and there's freaking deer going this way and blowing, and deer spot me up in the tree, and I'm like, geez, like I must be like, I felt like Elmer Fudd out there, So yeah, it was one of those years where I just felt like, I don't know, maybe I just got a little sloppy, maybe I got a little sloppy, maybe I got a little confident. I mean, I never felt like super confident or anything. I was just doing my own thing. But certainly after a year like that, because it should have been my best year ever with what I saw and the opportunities I had. It should have been my best year ever. It ended up being a good year if you look at what I killed. But if you look at all the other stuff, I basically had like 4, 5, 6 like really good hunts, and the rest were just screw ups. I mean, it really was. It really was.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. Just a lot of like, fundamental stuff that I kind of need to just go back and just, kind of emphasize. The basics still work. Just kind of playing the wind, being sneaky. If you're going to get up in a tree, sitting without moving, not being so fidgety, setting up where the cover is, and not where you think you want to be because you're too lazy to get up there, So I think a lot of times it was just like just a little overconfidence, like, I can make this work. I always feel like that. I can make this work. And there's just some times where I just need to be real with myself. I'm like, I'm gonna get busted here.
Yep.
you know, and if that first deer busts me, like the game is over.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah, it's mostly stuff like that.
I think a lot of people ask themselves, how can I get better at hunting? Well, do what Andy's talking about right now. Be critical of yourself, even if, your success looks good or in ways feels good. Find, those areas that you can improve on, because no matter how much experience you get, I guarantee you can always improve on something. I mean, every season I look back and I try to reflect on the good, but also burn those mistakes into my mind. Like I've been joking throughout this, talking about the one that came in to the rattling with the bow behind me, and like I have this photo board that's like pretty much my prized possession. I've got like tons of photos up on this wall behind the camera here, and if you were to really look at it, if you look at it big scale, it's like all these pictures of the good things. But if you look into the little corners, I got all the ones that got away that really,
Mm-hmm.
mess with me a little bit, or like in the moment where it's like such a bonehead mistake or something that, looking back, I felt like, oh, I could have definitely done better on that. Whether it be a stalk that was blown, or bows behind you, or whatever it may
Mm-hmm.
be. It's like there's all these situations that, you mess up throughout a season, but if you only take away the success, you're, that's limiting in itself. So I think that
Mm-hmm.
it's cool that you're being critical of yourself, even though, like you said, you shot 4 nice bucks. And I feel similar in ways from kind of the last 2 seasons. I feel frustrated at some of the things that I've done. My shot, uh, my shots have not been so good. Last year was not very good for me. I had to shoot a pronghorn twice. I hit a buck
Mm-hmm.
high in uh, Minnesota as well. Hit him in the shoulder. He got shot by a rifle hunter. Ended up making a good shot on a buck in Minnesota later in the season, but it's still like, you make that good shot and you're happy about it and you're like, okay, good, back on track. But still,
Mm-hmm.
it was not a great year for me shooting wise either. And then the year prior to that, 2021, I um, just felt like I was playing everything timid, or playing it timid at the wrong times. Like,
Mm-hmm.
wasn't aggressive enough. And it sounds, I feel like, kind of weird saying it when, you may watch videos throughout the season and be like, what do you mean, Zach? Like, you're, constantly on the move. How could you be, timid? Well, what I mean specifically is I wasn't cruising trying to actually find that really good sign. I was getting hung up on a past memory, or was just playing it too safe, like worrying about, oh, there might be a big one in here. I'm going to tiptoe around, then ultimately just waste a bunch of time. And I think, going back and trying to adjust those strategies and
Mm-hmm.
mistakes, or whatever you want to call them, just go a long way. And I think that I learned a lot this year adjusting from it. Like, one of my objectives um, when I went to Indiana for a muzzleloader hunt was, I don't even have no expectation of shooting a buck. I just want to get as aggressive as I can be and actually feel too aggressive. I want to feel too aggressive at the end of this hunt, so that way I can find some middle ground between tiptoeing and being too aggressive. So, like, I got out of that what I wanted. I didn't shoot a buck, but that wasn't even my objective, and I'm happy. I'm really actually proud of that, because it's like I just got after it. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's important, I think, to think about those things, and that's truly what I appreciate out of, you know, any experience level, is like, what could you improve on? Because we all can
Yeah.
improve. It's cool,
Yeah.
man.
It's funny. You mentioned about your board there, because I do something similar. I I've kept like uh so pretty kind of like three. I guess you would call them three journals. It's really two journals, but one is like my hunt, like a handwritten like um journal of every hunt that I've ever been on. Okay, which is super cool, and I'm really proud of that.
That's awesome.
From the very first year I've ever hunted, like, the date, where I was hunting, the wind, the temperature, what I saw, where I was sitting, all that stuff. But then another one is like my hunting stories. Okay. So like I write it out. I've done that for every single, not every doe, but every single buck that I've shot. But then in that same, like storybook, I've written down every, um, opportunity that I've screwed up on that where I write it down if I felt like I should have killed the buck. Now that doesn't mean like, oh, I sat in the wrong spot. If I was sitting over there, I would have got him. No, it's like, it's either, I had him in bow range and, he caught me drawing, or I hit him in the shoulder, or I shot high, or whatever it is, where I should have killed that buck. I write that story out, and I write in there what I did wrong and what I need to do to change it. And I've done that since I very first started. And I think like guys like you and I, and there's a lot of guys out there. Like I feel like those failures and those mess ups, they hit so hard because like we really really care about this. Like I really care about this, and I really work hard to be good at this. So when I fail, it's just like, oh, it's like a punch to the gut, because I want to be a good hunter, and I work hard to like get better every year. So when I have a year where I actually felt like I'm worse, man, it's tough.
Yeah.
And it kind of brings you back. I don't feel like I ever get cocky or confident, but sometimes maybe you do. Like you inside, you just feel like, man, things are rolling. I'm having another good year or whatever. You don't really think, and you start to like let these fundamentals or these obvious things, these things you should always have in place. You just start and put less importance on them, or you're not thinking about them, and it's like all of a sudden it's like you're out there being sloppy, and making mistakes that you shouldn't. So yeah, man, these seasons like this, they're good for you. They're good for growth. They're tough to swallow, especially when you care so much, and it's like you release an arrow at an animal like that, and it's like, there's no bigger moment out there for us. That's the biggest moment, and
it's
to
like the
screw that
Super
up,
Bowl for us at this point. I mean,
it is.
really.
It really is. Yeah. I mean, and to screw that up, and then to make it even worse, like you hurt that animal, man, it hits me like a ton of bricks. It always has. And it I think, there was a couple things kind of leading up to that hunt where, like, just like I said, opportunities where I definitely should have killed a good deer, and I didn't. But I was letting it roll off my back. I'm like, no, it's okay, no big deal. I'll get a crack at another one, no big deal. But like in my head, I'm like, you suck. You're thinking, and it starts to play with your head, your confidence a little, right? You're like, God dang, I missed that. Am I going to get another opportunity? I should have did that. Should have did that better. And then something else happened, and then something else happened, and all of a sudden I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Like, how do I kill a deer? I don't remember how.
Yeah.
It's like, I felt like that. And then I make this awesome move on the big buck I was after, the number one buck. Like, I don't get a buck like this to chase in Michigan every year. I just don't. And here he is. I think I got to know where he's bedding. I go in there planning to get up in a tree. My instincts tell me don't get up in the tree because they'll hear you. I get on the ground. I get this, he gets within 6 feet of me and doesn't know I'm there. And I'm hiding like this under the sticks, and I'm looking at him. And then I rise up to, like everything was just like, dude, like you did it right, man. You followed your gut. You did it right. Drill him in the shoulder. And I'm just like, my heart, my confidence, everything just went, whoop, just sunk. And it's just like, dude, you're an idiot, So it was just one of those years, man. And you just gotta like, be tough, pull up your britches and admit the mistakes and look at them and see like, all right, I make mistakes. I make a lot of them, a heck of a lot of them. So how do I get better? How do I make sure that doesn't happen again, or try my best to make sure that doesn't happen again? But sometimes I have to remind myself, and my friends are all really good, because I think I hunt more. Some of my friends hunt way more than me. I hunt more than some of my friends, but I think because of the way I hunt and I travel and stuff, like I tend to get a lot more opportunities than some of my friends, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all really good about it. It's just, because it feels like some of those guys don't screw up as much as me, but they'll be the first one to say like we're not getting as many opportunities as you. Like it's bow hunting, dude. Like it happens. Like this happened to me a few years ago or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, so it's like sometimes it's just that little encouragement and kind of get you back your head right. But it's a tough deal, man. Bow hunting is hard, and people probably think like, man, I go out there and I'm so dialed in and I'm just like so stealthy through the woods, and oh man, I wish I could hunt with Andy to see what he does. I mean, you'd laugh your ass off half the time. You
Yeah,
would.
same.
You'd be like, this guy knows how to kill deer, But every once in a while, like, you make those right decisions and pull it off. But man, it's I've always been that way. I've been kind of an aggressive type hunter, so I make a lot of mistakes. But I felt like that kind of took me on the fast track to becoming better quicker because I was always pushing, testing my limits quite a bit and like pushing things that most people probably would think is impossible or hard or won't work. But I've always had that mindset, like I can do that, I can do that. And then I try and I couldn't do it, but I felt like I could. But then I'm like, but if I did it this way, I would have did it. If I did it a little differently, I would have pulled that off. And so the next time I'm in that scenario, I do it a little different.
Yeah.
And it's just like by being more aggressive and kind of pushing those limits and pushing your limits. Like I've said this before, but like if you're not pushing the limits, how do you know how good you could even be? How do you know like you couldn't sneak right up on a buck and shoot him in his bed with your bow if you never try?
Yep.
Like you might be sneaky enough to do that. You might be patient enough. You might be so in tune with your surroundings, with your foot placement, with the way the wind's blowing, the noise of the plane going over your head, and knowing when to move and when to sit still for 30 minutes like a rock. And then you make your final approach. Like you might be able to do that, but you have to like push those limits to see what your limits are. A lot of guys they don't have that confidence or willingness to try those things and make those big, huge mistakes because it seems stupid. It seems silly to try to do. But I mean, look at the stuff Jared Scheffler's doing. I mean, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So, you see a guy like that doing that, and you're like, he can do it. I can do it. I just need reps. I need to make the mistake. I got to get out there and do it. So, a lot of guys that I think have more of that play it safe. I don't want to be detected. That mindset of like kind of sit back and wait. You don't get those reps. You don't get those encounters as much. You don't get those mistakes as much. So your learning process is so much slower compared to a guy like me or a guy like you that's more aggressive. And you gotta learn, like when you are that aggressive and you're making those mistakes, you're making those errors. Okay, you gotta like be able to admit it. You gotta be able to identify what you did wrong and make those adjustments. And that's where those instincts start to kind of kick in and they start to develop over time. But it takes a while. But I always tell like the younger guys, like I get all these messages on social media and like, I got this buck, what would you do? And I'd be like, man, I'd go in there right after him, be careful. You don't want to give them too much advice because it's so situational.
Right.
Like, I always say, just go for it, man. Just go for it and try to be smart. Listen to your gut. If your gut tells you to slow down, slow down. If your gut tells you to set up, set up. If your gut tells you to keep going, I was like, no matter what happens, you're going to be better the next time around.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the biggest takeaways that I would hope somebody would get from what you just said is being able to admit it. I think that's a really big hurdle. And the reason I think that is, how many times have you heard somebody say, well, he got downwind of me? It's like, well, why did he get downwind of me? Or there's some sort of like excuse, I guess, where it's like, well, this happened. It's like, but why did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, he saw me sitting there because I didn't have enough cover, or he smelled me because I didn't know that trail was there, or or I wasn't playing the wind properly, or whatever it may be. Is like, admit it, think
Mm-hmm.
about it, be extremely critical of yourself, and then move on. Also, don't let that weigh you down every day, because that also is a bad habit. It's like, be honest with yourself and then move on. And then, because in 5 minutes, the next opportunity might come past. Like, for
Mm-hmm.
example, you used the example of the story in Iowa where you had the big buck go past, and then as he's leaving, another one's
Yeah.
coming. And I think that's a great perspective to keep in mind, is at any point your season might just completely turn around, and it sometimes happens easily. And I
Mm-hmm.
think just yeah, that is hunting. And I think like you said too, the more you push it, the more you know for the next time. And it seems crazy, but the first time I made the decision to stalk a buck bedded, it was just like, well, I mean, what else am I going to do, really? Like, I could sit here and
Mm-hmm.
watch him, and it cracks me up now, like watching, hunting shows, like more of a production type of hunting show where, maybe they're chasing one specific buck, and there's all these, like, actual visuals on the buck, but there's just a whole lot of waiting. And it just cracks me up because it's like, oh, like,
Yeah.
if I see that buck go in the, CRP field with a doe, it's like, are you kidding me, dude? Like,
Yeah.
you can't get me out of the setup faster, and
Yeah.
it just,
Yeah.
it is interesting to see that. And then also it kind of makes you realize too why so many people are hesitant to do it, is because there are a lot of situations that you see on TV or whatever it may be, wherever you watch your hunting content these days. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of situations where, especially on a well managed, well controlled, large scale property, where you do keep seeing the same buck over and over, seeing them do these patterns or come out into
Mm-hmm.
these open areas in daylight. But for most of us, that's not
Yeah.
reality. And therefore, when
Right.
you have that opportunity, you're better off just to strike for it, in my opinion. This is just my opinion and the way that I like to do it, similar to you. Or it's like, if I see him right there, I can't guarantee he's going to be there ever again, let alone
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow. Like, he may never be there again, so I might as well try it now. If it doesn't work, so be it. And at least I have that experience for the next hunt. And it's just helped me a ton. But I did also want to tell a quick story of overconfidence. I had been more, I'd been real aggressively stalking bucks any chance I had got for several years. And it was 2021, and I had drawn some New Mexico deer tag kind of by accident. And I didn't get a chance. I thought I was going to get down there to scout, but got down there, and some of the areas that I thought I could maybe get away from the hunters, I wasn't finding many deer and finding a ton of rattlesnakes. So ended up kind of changing areas, and long story short, found this buck, and he was like by far the biggest bodied deer, and he was just, we called him the glorified fork. He just was a big fork, huge framed fork with, at the very end of his G2s, he had little splits and these dinky little brow tines. He was a glorified fork.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of my greatest hunting memories is chasing that buck with Roy around the mountains up there, and he bedded 2 times, and I stalked him on the second day of the hunt and the last day of the hunt. And up to that point, and this is, I hate even saying this, but like, when I'd actually spotted a buck up to this point bedded, I'd never not gotten in range of him and like had a legit opportunity. When he was actually bedded the whole time, I made the move. So like, all I could think is, oh, if we bet him, he's dead. In my head, it's like I got too confident, and therefore I
Mm-hmm.
kind of took a few plays off. Which, you take a few plays off, few steps, or you get a little careless, and next thing you know, It costs you. And both times I exposed myself because I was just not thinking correctly. I was in position or I was getting close to in. The first time, I knew I was in range, but I kind of just got sloppy and didn't glass ahead enough as I took my steps. It was like I was taking too many steps, and little
Mm-hmm.
did I know he was looking at me through the brush. And I know that because watching the footage from a different angle. And then the second time, I was set up on him 35 yards, him and his buddy, and I think his buddy saw me. It was the same 2 bucks actually both times I stalked him, but I think his buddy saw me because I was standing up trying to glass him. Where I had been set up in the shadows, waiting. All I needed him to do was stand up and, wait for an opportunity at that point. Wind's blasting in my face. But I think he saw me standing up and got me on the skyline because they were bedded slightly lower than me. But
Mm-hmm.
both of those examples are just completely careless, overconfident, being like, well, I got it in the bag. It's like, oh, and, up to the point of the mistake, had done a lot of things right, but still was far from getting, the job done. And I just think that
Yeah.
it's moments like that that really bring you back to like, hey, you cannot take this too lightly, and
Mm-hmm.
it helps, sometimes you need that kick in the ass to be like, hey, like do better next time. And I really appreciate those hunts later. More than the ones that most of the time at least more than the ones that you actually do everything right.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Think about like you know, like a boxer or like an MMA fighter, right? That like is just torching everybody. He's on a streak, and then he runs into this dude, you know, he's on a 15 fight win streak. He runs into this dude and just loses, gets his ass kicked, right? And like all of a sudden he's like, holy shit, that's kind of like how I felt, probably how you felt.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, damn, like, okay, like I either got sloppy here, maybe I let my guard down or whatever, or maybe this guy has a whole new set of skills. Like I need to train for this and get
Mm-hmm.
better, and then he comes back in the rematch and he's able to beat him. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like that, right?
Yeah.
Because these encounters that we have, they're wild animals, and there's no way we can be completely ready for every situation. Every situation has a different like intensity and excitement level and pace. And sometimes it's just you and the deer, sometimes it's you and the deer, and there's all these other deer around. It's like super intense. And just, I could think of like some hunts where I did everything right. I got into position. It seemed almost impossible, like especially out west, just to get a shot. And I'm holding my pin, and there was so much going on. I completely forget to like adjust for the wind drift.
Mm-hmm.
Like something so simple that in my backyard I do every time, but there's not all this other stuff like
Mm-hmm.
going on like that. Little things like that, just dumb things that I know. Like you got a big crosswind. You got to at 50 yards or whatever. You got to aim 4 or 5 inches to the left. That like things like that. There's a quick story. It was this year. Ohio buck, a real big buck, like a really, really big buck for that open area of Ohio. Like, how it is down there. The age structure isn't great. They, the, the gun hunting pressure is really high for the amount of cover that's
Yep.
available.
Yep.
And they're very, very efficient at driving these little woodlots and killing what comes out. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't get a lot of those like 4 or 5-year-old bucks. This buck had an incredible rack. I don't know how old he was. It was an area I like barely hunt, and I started glassing him up in the summer, and there was actually 2 really nice ones in there. I would have been happy with either of them in any other circumstance, but just because that deer was such a special animal, I was like, it's that one. It's that one or none. And the second biggest one was like 150-inch 8. So
Jeez.
it was like that caliber. He's a big 6x6, and I I've posted about. I've talked about it. I think there's a video on on my social media where like I'm on the ground and I'm filming and I zoom in and you can see the buck bedded, and he's bedded right on the edge of this woodlot, like kind of like out in the open. But anyway, there was a spot where I thought I could kill this deer. In fact, I knew I could kill this deer if I could get into this tree. And every single day, I never had a good wind, and I just couldn't get there. But the way he came out of this little tiny woodlot, they would come out and they would head to the south, and they would kind of cut this corner where there was like a little tree line that came out about 20, 30 yards off this square little woods in the middle of nothing but wide open. And there was a tree right there in that little tree line where these deer would come out, and they would kind of angle by it. And I was like, if I could just get in that tree, I'll kill this thing. He was doing it all, late summer, like leading up to the season. And then season opens and it's like, I'm getting a dead wrong wind every time, like dead wrong. It's always like a southwest. I told you about all those south winds.
Mm-hmm.
It's so many of them this year. And so what I kept doing was I kept hunting on the opposite side, observing in the ground. I'd snuck in through this cornfield. I'm right on the edge of the corn. There's nothing between him but beans and I, and this deer is in a spot that nobody would think to hunt because the woodlot's about this big, and they're just there. They're in a bachelor group and they're there for a few days and then they disperse, or the beans come out and they're just gone and you don't know where they go. So there's like this little window and I'm like camped out on this thing every chance I get. And I'm always in that corn. And I see him come out a couple different times and go right by that tree. I'm like, oh my God, it's killing me. Well, I get there. I don't know, it was like my third or fourth time. And I felt like if I could keep eyes on him, keep tabs on him and see if there's, something else he does, or maybe he comes this way. And I just wanted to know that he was there and observe him as much as I could. And I'm sitting there and I'm glassing. And then all of a sudden I'm like scanning, and I had been there for like an hour and a half and I didn't see him initially. And this might have made the difference because when I initially got out there, it was really breezy. And then as the evening went on, it went from 20 to 15 to 12. Well, by the time I scanned for the fourth time, I spot his rack bedded. And, there's like an hour and a half of daylight left. And the wind's already died down to like 12.
Yeah.
So I was really mad at myself about that. So I look and I know that the very next day, like tomorrow, I get the wind I've been waiting for to sit that other tree. But he's bedded right there, right now. And there's actually a drainage ditch, those flat ditches.
Yep.
It's like flat and then go down a little drainage. There's one that goes right up to him, but it's early season. It's full of weeds, like over your head, not quiet. But I was like, if I go slow enough, I was like, I can do this. And I'm going back and forth. Like, do I do the safe play and sit in the tree I've been sitting in? That's the smart move. You'll probably kill him tomorrow. But every part of me wanted to go after it because it's just badass.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a badass thing to do. And I said to myself, I was going back and forth, and I said, I said to myself, I remember saying this to myself, the better hunter would be able to pull this off. And I was like, I'm going to do it. Win or lose, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to be fine with it. So I'm like, screw it, I'm going for it. So I get down in that ditch and I start making my way, and things are going good. I'm moving with the breeze. I'm crawling some of it. I'm like taking all these awkward steps, just trying to step and put my feet in places where I'm like not rubbing against too much brush and making noise. And I get to like, I don't know, 60 yards or so. And I kind of peek up over the ditch and I look and I can still see him. So I get down and I start going a little further. I get to like 54 and I look up, and all of a sudden I see a different big rack, and it's that big 8, the big 8. And he's up and he's right on the edge and he's doing a little scrape. And I'm like, holy crap, I'm 54 yards from him. got a shot at him. And I'm like, nope, I'm not doing it. I've never passed a deer that big in my life, but I'm like, I'm not doing it. So I go in and I don't remember. I was like right around 40, 42, and it was dying down just enough where I felt like I can't go any further. I
Mm-hmm.
just can't. I need to let him come out, make the mistake. And if he goes the other way and goes towards that tree, hey, no harm, no foul. I'm undetected, like no big deal. So I'm sitting there at 42, and I got my bow, and that big 8 is like right there, man. All I need to do is just get up on my knees and make a shot, and I'm like, I'm not doing it. He would probably been my biggest 8, and so I'm sitting there, and every once in a while, like I don't want to be like up, so I just kind of hunch down, and every once in a while I just like put my eyes up just to see. I don't know, it was like the third or fourth time I kind of get my glass and I go like this, and I'm looking, and between the last time I went down, and this time coming back up, two little bucks, like year-and-a-half-year-old scrappers, had come out into the beans, and I didn't know it. So that they had to come towards me a little bit. So they're kind of like out here, and I'm looking here, and I put my head up, and then I put the glass down, and I'm like, and then one of them's locked on. He's locked
Oh,
on. And, oh God, like the worst thing ever. Like the youngest, dumbest buck in the whole group.
he's gotcha.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh. So I'm like, I'm trying to remain motionless, and he's like, walking towards me, taking those steps, like alert, and I like, I just try to like hardly even move and just kind of like sink down into the grass, and just I'm like, please just lose interest, please.
Mm-hmm.
So I get down there, and I'm kind of like down below eye level, and I'm just waiting, and I don't hear anything. Like I don't hear anything run, I don't hear anything blow, nothing. Time goes by, and I was like, I gotta see what's going on, like the big one could be there at 25 yards. I don't even know it. So I slowly, I just kind of like peek through the grass, and I'm looking, those little deer are gone. And I look, I glass up, everything's gone. Nothing's out. And I can see this bean field. I can see this bean field. I can see the whole woodlot edge. Everything's gone. And that was it. Never saw him again. I was there the next day in the tree I wanted to be in. Nothing came out.
Uh,
Nothing was there. So I think that they got nervous. I think those deer probably picked up on them, and then they were
mm-hmm.
just gone. And
Yeah.
you know how it is, man. There's no depth of cover for them. They run, and it's like, let's get out of this woodlot and go to that one. And that one is, might be 3/4 of a mile, over there. So don't know what happened to that deer. I hope he's there next year. But that was one of those things, man, where it's just like, I felt like that's this, the other way to kill him would have been cool. It would have been cool. Be patient, make the calculated move, the safe move. But I mean, how many chances do you get in a hunting career? Like in a spot like this, a deer like that, on unmanaged ground that like anybody could hunt, but no one thinks to, and you find this like special deer, and you got him on the ground, and you can sneak within bow range and shoot them from the ground. Like it's what I live for. Like, so
You and me both.
that one stung, but it didn't like take the wind out of my sails, because I knew it was a risky move. But the hardest part was just the fact that I was like, God, if I had scanned a little better when I first got there, I would have had more time. I would have had better wind, higher wind speed. Those other deer wouldn't have got up. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
those things right there. Like I was sloppy. I got in there, did a quick once over, and I'm like, all right, I got 3 hours before anything moves. Like that was my mentality. I was probably playing on my phone or something. You know what I mean? Like stupid.
Yeah.
So, but if I would have got in there and done like meticulously scanning, I would have seen them instantly. I got the high wind. I could have snuck in there, and all those other deer would have stayed bedded, and I could have got right up on them.
Mm-hmm.
So mistakes like that, like dumb, like beginner mistakes.
Yeah, but like you definitely learn from it, and like it just makes you that much sharper. I mean, as frustrating as it is, and as much as you can beat yourself up over it and say, "Oh, beginner," it's just like at the same time, it's not beginner to make the decision, in my opinion, to go for it. And I couldn't agree more with how many opportunities do you get to try to pull something off like that? And like, on the other hand, how many opportunities or how many times, again, do you hear that story of like, well, I saw him out there, but, just didn't do it, just he never came my way. And it's like, oh, it just, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, really, there's very few situations in which I won't try to push it. I mean, actually, one of the few, it's ironic I keep bringing it up. It's actually a story, though, in general, I bring up because I think about it so much, is that bow behind me one. That was a rare situation in which a buck's cruising. He was alone. It was like, I can't really get much closer because it was in that uh, heat wave of 2020 when it was getting so brutal hot and the leaves were like stacked, that tall, just the crunchiest leaves you could dream of. But, just on the fly thinking like, well, rattling could work, it's going to be loud enough. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I love pushing it. I love trying to get deer in close with a bow and stalking them in their beds. There's nothing like, they're so vulnerable at that time, whether it's early season or late season, but especially when they're with a doe, it's like if they're with a
Oh,
doe, man, like there's about no reason, in my opinion,
no.
in which you shouldn't go towards them. Like that's my
Yep.
favorite situation. I mean, by all means, like get after them in those situations. And also, too, if I could have every deer that I shoot from now until the time I hang it up or I'm dead be bedded buck stalks, or getting in there calling to them and them coming in inside of 15 yards, quarter and two, head on, whatever, like that. That's why I like
Mm-hmm.
elk hunting. It's like
Yeah.
you get in there and you're bugling to him and he comes in head on, like looking for you. That's just pure fun right there. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't get that from like waiting around, and that's why I always like to push it, even calm conditions. And I guess one of the things that I tossed around a lot when I first started the ground hunting thing was like, well, it probably does make more sense to get into a tree stand at this point or with these conditions. But
Mm-hmm.
I was like, if I really want to get better at this, and it's something that I really want to, try to do as much as I can, which is a goal of mine. It's like I'm gonna have to learn how to do it when the conditions suck for it. So, I found advantages to those calm days, or the really any condition list that you can come up with. I've tried to pick a little strength that I can take advantage of on my end and a weakness that they have on their end, and just,
Mm-hmm.
but that kind of goes both ways too, because it's like, for example, on that calm crunchy day, his advantage is he can hear a lot, but it's also can be his disadvantage as well. And I just love that, and I don't get it from hunting in any other way other than on the ground, man, right with him. It's just, I
Mm-hmm.
just love that.
Yeah.
Literally
There's a art.
live for it.
Yeah. I'm with you, man. There's a art to when you're kind of hunting on the ground and you're kind of doing that like slip hunting, kind of sneaking through there. There's an art, like, where you kind of you can get in these situations where you definitely can go too far when the situation is just like it it just it just isn't going to happen. Like, maybe the cover, or the, like you said, the noise or whatever. There can be these moments where if you keep going, if you keep sneaking through or stalking, you're gonna do it until failure. So there's often, I find myself, you come to a spot where you have to make a decision to, I'm either, if I go any further, I'm more likely going to blow this opportunity up, or I'm going to sneak in as close as I can to where, I think this deer is, or where I know this deer is. If it's like out west, you actually got a visual, and get to where you can get, and then kind of let things
Mhm.
happen and let him make a mistake.
Yeah.
There's an art there, and sometimes I struggle with that, but I'm getting better at that. Just kind of knowing, like, yeah, I think I can pull off some. I can pull off some things. I can be sneaky, even as big as I am. I can be sneaky, and I can crawl a long ways on the ground, and I can be super quiet. But there's times where I just have to tell myself, like, I'm looking around at every option. It's just like, it just can't be done. It cannot be done. It's just not. This is the way I'm going to kill him, and it's hard to pull back sometimes because you're just
Yeah.
like, I want to do it, or I just want to try it and
Yeah.
see. But there's most of the time where I feel like, that the chances, the percentage wise, is really low. It's like I almost always fail. But if I feel like if it's above like a certain amount, like if it's above 50%, like I feel like, all right, I can pull this off. If I
Yeah.
do everything right, maybe a few things go in my favor, like I can pull this off. And then the rare one where you get is like he's in the perfect spot, has no idea you're there. You can maintain a visual, and it's just like I just got to get there and make the shot.
Yeah. Yeah, the one that sticks out to me that was just super high odds that I have had recently was a buck that I shot with Jake in North Dakota. It's like spotted him. He was below
Mm-hmm.
us. We could pinpoint exactly where he was, and while we couldn't keep the visual once we got down there, the conditions were so perfect. I mean, just a straight line wind right in our face the entire time. So it's like, as long as you're not just being a total bonehead, like you should be able to
Mm-hmm.
pull this off. And dude, I went into a weird place when that was going down. I left it in the video on purpose, and I don't I don't know if anybody would ever really understand what I'm even trying to say, but I left it in there on purpose where on my wireless mic you hear me go, and it's just me like being like, all right, you're going to put your body through hell to kill this thing. No matter what's down there on that ground, you're crawling through it, and like you're going to get him. You have to get this one because
Mm-hmm.
it's too good to be true. You're not going to get a whole lot of chances with a buck like this in a spot like that with a wind like this. Like there could be 10 more days in a row where you don't even have a wind that blows that hard, let alone that consistently perfectly in your favor, you know? It's just,
Right.
I love situations like that. And when you get those, like you said, those rare situations, you got to just buckle down and take advantage of it. And things, things generally work out if you stay focused. But it's hard. I mean, it's a funny deal. I'm terrible with focus, man. Like, put me in like a room and say, fill out this, math homework. I'm going to have a heck of a time doing that. Or
Mm-hmm.
sit in a tree stand and try not to move. I'm going to have a heck of a time doing that. But put like a buck bedded in a spot and say, take, however long it takes to get there, he'll be there when you get to that spot. And it's like, for whatever reason, I can do that. And I could do it with playing
Yeah.
sports too. It's like playing sports and, being on the move while hunting, I feel like I can do well. But pretty much everything else, I lose focus quickly.
That's the that's uh that's funny you say that because I think I have a little bit of like ADD myself.
I absolutely
Just I
do.
think just kind of the busy life that I have and all this stuff going on and multiple jobs and getting my daughter here and getting out of there, worry about this, trying to get out hunting, worry about my significant other and what we got going on. It's like all this stuff that's always doing this. And even when I'm in a tree, I have a hard time shutting that off.
hmm
I really, really do. But like when I am on the ground with an antelope or a mule deer or a whitetail, and I go in that mode where it's like I'm going in now. It's the only time in my whole life where I am completely zoned in on this one thing, completely focused, and I'm not thinking about anything else.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can get that with shooting my bow, but even that's hard because I'm home, and I'm thinking about all this stuff that, where do I need to be in 30 minutes or this needs to be done or I should be doing this. But like, that's like the only thing. So that's why I think why I crave it so much, why I love going out west so much. My whitetail hunting has taken a huge hit because I'm pushing myself out west more and more because I'm just in search for that feeling in those moments. Like I just want those moments over and over. It's just the best feeling, dude. It's just like there's nothing else. Nothing else exists except that animal and you have to take all these like these perfect steps and these perfect movements, and be in tune with everything that's going on, the wind, the noise of your the way you place your foot, the other animals that might be over here that you have to stay hidden from. And it's like, it can get so technical, and you got to be so involved and so focused to get it done. I just love that, man.
Yeah.
It's just like I escape into that moment. It's like I want to be there all the time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that it is something special, and until, and it can, I feel like with other people, it's something else, right? Like there have been a couple other things, but it was pretty much baseball and football, right? It's like playing a sport, being active, I can do it, but otherwise, it's really hard for me to turn my mind off too, and I just get all scatterbrained. But it's like you find that focus, and it's satisfying. It just feels
Mm-hmm.
good. It's like, man, I don't care about anything else. You're stress free, just completely stress free. Which sounds weird because it's like, like if you mess it up, it's like you feel like it's a big deal later, but in the moment, you just
Yeah.
you don't worry. I feel like I don't worry about anything. It's just like whatever. Here we go. This is what I showed up to do in the first place. So let's do it.
Yep. Yep.
All right, man.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, let's wrap it up. I feel like we could probably sit here and talk probably for another 4 or 5 days if we wanted to, but pr-
Yeah.
appreciate you coming on, and yeah, thanks for everybody for listening to Andy and Zach talking about all kinds of hunting related topics. We got pretty deep there for a while.
Yeah. Hey, can I mention something real
Yeah,
quick?
absolutely. I was gonna say mention
Yeah.
yeah, whatever you want.
Yeah. So I've been doing a little bit of content over at Hunt Better. It's a new platform. You can find it on Instagram. But the reason I uh, think this is cool, and you're actually going to be a guest on there soon.
Yeah,
And
which
you're
I'm
the perfect
stoked.
guy. Yeah, you're the perfect guy to have on there. So we really want to, the goal over there is to really stress woodsmanship, and really kind of put a focus on that, and kind of we want to help preserve that culture of woodsmanship, because I feel like, and I think a lot of people are feeling this way, we are very, very, in some aspects of hunting, very far removed of what hunting used to be. It's becoming a whole different thing with some of these technologies and some of these methods. And um, honestly, a big a big part of that makes me sad. And I've never really produced much content. I'm kind of a private guy, um, really an introvert. But when I was presented with this opportunity, I was like, man, that's that's something worth helping out, and doing something for. So it's awesome. Part of it is a subscription based type deal, but the guests that we have on there are all what I consider woodsmen. Like they stress woodsmanship. That doesn't mean they don't use technology, but their base is scouting and woodsmanship. You got guys like Jared Scheffler, like Steve Shirt, like woodsmen. Guys that can go out there and go anywhere, and be good hunters, good effective hunters. And one of the things you get to do is, when you're on there, this is going to be a live talk. Those people get to come on and ask questions that they've always wanted to ask Zach Farrenball, or ask Aaron Warburton, or ask Steve Shirt, or me, or there's going to be all kinds of guys. I mean, the one we just had with Jared Scheffler it was unreal. Like, I mean, talking about things that you've never heard him talk about. And it was super cool. And one of the things that I'm helping out with, that I think is probably the best learning tool. And actually, you guys do a really good job at this at THP, but like, we call it break down the hunt, but we're highlighting like certain hunts of bucks. Like, I've done a couple, Garrett Prahl's done a couple, Jared Schaefer's done a couple. We got other guys that are going to do them, but it's like highlighting a hunt for a mature deer, but it's going to be a deep dive into the tactics used, the decisions made, why they were made. They're going to show the map, the way the buck was moving, the way we moved, where we set up. And these, I've watched them all, and they're the best learning tool out there. I mean, they are hands down. It's not just a show. It's fact, it's very little a show. There might be some B-roll. It's more of the why and the how of it happened, and really explaining it and like the key takeaways of the hunt. And it's such a cool thing. And like, I've really enjoyed like kind of reliving my hunts and going that. And, Garrett is putting those together. And then the other thing that's on there is called Field Guide, which is, I'm contributing, Garrett, Jared Schaefer, Rendell Eric, Steve Shirk, Nathan Killen, like all woodsmen, right? Guys that have been doing this a long time. And they are, we're documenting like little short videos. It could be us scouting, when we find something like that we think is a good learning opportunity, or what we look for, or something that's of interest. We're just doing a little quick 30-second to 3-minute video documenting like the process of scouting. For me, I've been doing a lot of archery stuff. So I got like, broadhead tuning stuff, how I build my arrows, how I like to tune my bow, my practice routine, how often I practice, why I do these certain drills, because they help keep certain bad habits away. And all the guys are kind of doing little things like that. So it's a really neat way to like, follow like some of these hunters around and be able to see kind of their process, not just the scouting process, but their hunting process, their archery practice. I mean, some guys don't practice archery at all. And then you got guys like me that have shot like every day for 60 days. You know what I mean? So we're all over the board, but that's what makes it interesting. It's really cool. So, go over there and check it out. And there's going to be some free stuff too. So I don't know. It's kind of cool. I think the message of preserving that hunting culture it's an important one, man, because we're losing it. And I don't know. I think, hunting is like, I feel like probably a lot of people that have hunted for a long time, as corny as it sounds, like hunting has given so much to me. It's given me direction. It's given me something that I'm passionate about, that actually drives me to be good at something. There's not much else. There never really was much else out there other than football, and that didn't last long.
Yeah.
But this really it's given me a lot. And I think any veteran that's been doing this a long time, you kind of just like, you appreciate that. And you like, what can I do? What can I do to like preserve this or give back, or, maintain what we love, and seeing the way things are going out there with just some of these tactics and technologies and stuff. I don't want to get too far away from woodsmanship that we don't even know what it is anymore. I mean, listen to 90% of the hunting stories anymore, and most of them involve some sort of cell camera, or or something like that, or some redneck blind, riding on a food plot, or bait piles and cell cameras and stuff. And it's just like, man. And I want everyone to hunt the way they want to hunt. And if it's legal, and I see guys doing that, and I see those guys, and I'm happy for those guys, and some of their dedication and work is truly impressive. But I just don't want to lose what hunting is, what it was, and deep down, like what I really think it should be. We cannot lose the culture of woodsmanship in hunting, because then it becomes something totally different.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more, man. I think that's awesome. I think that it's something that I think about all the time. Actually, just did a podcast with Mark Kenyon about live stream cameras, and ultimately just, that technology in general. And I think that
it's scary, man. It's scary stuff.
It's definitely scary, and you're walking through some public land, and everywhere you look, there's cell cams lining the ridges. It's like, what's that going to look like in another 10, 20 years? And I mean, without opening up a whole can of worms, it's just like that's something that I feel, especially for, like you said, young hunters, it's how do you get the same thing out of it that, we got for those of us that started before those things even existed, you know. And I
Mhm.
just, yeah, I really appreciate that type of conversation in general, and keeping the woodsmanship
Yeah.
alive is that's what drives me at the end of the day. Is like I never know what's around that corner, and it's what keeps me moving, you know. So it keeps me
Hmm.
interested, and I think that yeah, I I also like what you said about like giving you like a purpose in life, because absolutely hunting. I mean, the reason that I take care of myself by trying to eat healthy, working out, uh, you know, just in general, like taking care of myself isn't because of anything other than I want to maximize, you know, how effective I can potentially be out there. Like the harder I work at that. So it's like it's literally changed my life. I mean, I know that
Yeah.
sounds silly, but it's like if I didn't hunt, I don't know what I would be doing, but it certainly wouldn't be what I'm doing right now, you know. So
Yeah. I'm
I
the
don't know.
same way, man. Like like back in my 20s, I used to like I go to the gym several times a week. Like back in my 20s, it was like, oh man, how much can I lift and do all this stuff? Well, now everything is about mobility and
Yeah.
flexibility, and I'm working my hips and I'm trying to maintain like good back strength so that like when I'm out west and in the mountains, like I'm strong and I'm
Hmm.
effective. Like I'm the same way, man. My whole reason for trying to eat healthy and trying to get to the gym every day is one for the mental discipline. I feel like it makes me mentally tough. If I can
Hmm.
push myself to get up at 5 o'clock every morning, go to the gym. Half the time I do not want to go, but I get this routine of like forcing myself to go. Then when I'm like, I'm in the Rubies in Nevada and it's like day 5 and I'm like, yeah, like this is killing me. Like I got to go up, 2,000 feet, 1,500 feet or whatever, or go down 1,000 feet to get water just to come back up. Like I can do it because like I've forced myself to do stuff I didn't want to do so many times. It's just like another thing. So it makes that mental toughness. But like I have bad knees. I got arthritis in my knees, my back. I have degenerative discs. So like I have to maintain like all this core strength and flexibility so that I'm even effective out there. So like every day, that's the stuff I'm working on anymore.
Dude,
So just for you
I
know,
feel like we ought to just do a whole podcast on that at some point. I feel like we could talk about just keeping
that'd
your
be a good one.
body, you know, healthy, because I mean, it is important. If you ask me, if you're seriously passionate about it, I think that, I mean, honestly, if you're passionate about being alive and having a good quality life, I mean, you know, it's a certain amount of movement is important to maintain that. And whether it's
Yeah.
hunting or just, you know, being happy walking through your house, I guess, I'm sure. But I just think that, you know, it's things that, I don't know. I definitely didn't do a very good job of when I was in my early 20s. I was about, yeah, mid 20s. I started being like, all right, you gotta start making some changes.
Hmm.
I've made some serious like life changes, but I'm happy with them all because ultimately, it's like I feel better and I'm happy and I'm able to do the things that I like to do, and you know, I hope I can still do them as well as my dad can do them, because he's 57 and still getting around pretty well, and it's like
That's
inspiring
all.
and motivating, and yeah, it's cool. So anyway,
Cool.
all right, everybody.
Awesome, buddy.
Well, thanks for listening, and yeah, we'll catch everybody listening on the next one.
All right. Thanks, guys.